I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Suspend temporarily the convertibility. Suspend temporarily. We will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
What on earth got you interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
Okay, so what's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is...
What's Bitcoin?
Inflation-resistant money.
Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of The Nate Martin Show. I'm your host. I am Nate Martin, and on this podcast, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. We're going to talk about sound money principles, and we're going to make comparisons between sound money principles and the fiat currency system that the world has today. On August 15th of 1971, that is 50 years ago this week, Richard Nixon, President of the United States, made an announcement that erased the peg of currencies around the world with gold. We're going to talk about that with our guest today. We're going to talk about how that has affected the money in your pocket and what is going to happen in the future, and how Bitcoin, when compared, is something that you need to consider. My guest today is Rob Soltan. He is the owner of MineralX.com, a collectibles and precious metals dealer. And he has a lot of interesting stories to share with you, and also some perspectives about the monetary system and Bitcoin that I think you're going to want to hear. So, Rob, welcome to the show. Welcome to the first episode of The Nate Martin Show. I'm glad you agreed to be a guest here on the show.
I'm honored. The first show. This is big time. I'm excited for this.
You know a lot about precious metals, and you have an understanding of the history of gold being the standard for money, and then it not being, and what's happening now. But I really kind of want to get some of your stories to how you got involved in precious metals. Can you tell me something about that?
About 3 years into waiting tables, a collectibles dealer came in, and we kind of hit it off. And it was super ironic because he came in at we closed the restaurant at 9 p.m. And if you ever watch that movie Waiting, where everybody freaks out in the kitchen when somebody comes in at the last minute in a restaurant,
Yes.
sort of thing. And so this guy, now that I'm good friends with him, it's like, oh, that's like him to do that. But he came in, he'd never been to this restaurant ever. And he lived in this same city for I think 10 years or something, 20 years. And he'd never been to this specific restaurant. And this random time, I'm the shift leader and I close the restaurant. So I have to take the table. I'm mad about taking the table. Comes in at 8:45, close at 9. I take care of them. And they order a nice bottle of wine. And I'm like, all right, they're pretty cool, take care of this table. And we ended up becoming friends, and he invited me to the house, and they lived in a very fancy area. And they were like, what do you do here? You're only going to be a waiter? Do you have any other, things you want to do with your life or anything? This is what you're doing for full time? And I'm like, I've dropped out of college. I'm kind of interested to figure out other things. Well, maybe we have a situation for you up here. And, it just is a crazy, I can't even begin to start how that relationship ended up flourishing into something where I ended up kind of working underneath him, meeting a lot of people at the house over there. And again, I wasn't from that. I was from kind of I was not used to the fancier lifestyle. So to drive up to this big mansion sort of thing, and there are these collectible dealers, I'm like, oh my, this is crazy. So I kind of protéged a little bit under them and was a fly on the wall, so to speak. And eventually I went, none of you are doing anything on social media. None of you are really online. I think you're missing the thing here with Instagram and all these different social medias going on, and having your own website and all of that. So I'm going to branch off and do my own thing.
It was 50 years this week that the world officially went onto a fiat standard, because Nixon just basically said the piece of paper that you have in your hand to whatever foreign governments that he's talking to is no longer a bearer bond. It's no longer, you can redeem this piece of paper for gold anytime you want to. And it turned into, you can turn that piece of paper for gold anytime we want you to.
The more I went down the rabbit hole, I realized that they didn't teach any of this in school. The term sound money, When people say sound money, it comes from the sound of throwing a silver coin on the counter, or a gold St. Gaudens on the counter, or a gold lib on the counter, the old 20. And that's, ironically enough, that's $20. But to put it in perspective, gold's trading at, 1,700, 1,800 an ounce right now. And an ounce of gold in old St. Gaudens is $20 is the denomination. So $20, 1 ounce of gold is now 1,700, 1,800. That just goes to show you how diluted the currency has become.
Yeah, because the trading value of gold when Nixon made the announcement was $35 an ounce. That was the intended exchange rate, and as of the Bretton Woods Agreement, everybody's currency was pretty much tied to gold as far as how many particular units of a currency would get you an ounce of gold. And when Nixon made the announcement on August 15th of 71, all of a sudden that agreement was pretty much voided.
It's like Roosevelt came in 1933 and confiscated all the gold and scared everybody into giving their gold up. And so they held the gold hostage, and then Nixon essentially killed all the hostages.
There's something that has been forwarded for 50 years now that is just common thought. I want to play a clip for you of Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio, who is the chair of the Banking Committee. And I want you to listen to what he said in an opening statement that he made on the cryptocurrencies "What is it good for?" hearing. Hang on, let me. I'm going to ask you a question after I play this.
Since Bitcoin came online in 2009, thousands of these so-called digital assets, virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, stable coins, investment tokens, have poured into the markets. All of these currencies have one thing in common. They're not real dollars. They're not backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. That means they all put Americans' hard-earned money at risk.
That was Senator Brown from Ohio, who is the head of the Banking Committee.
He sounded like a banker.
No, he's not a banker. He's head of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and who had the hearing on cryptocurrency. What is it good for? And that was part of his opening statement. No, it wasn't a call to senators to come to a hearing and try to listen objectively to different sides of a coin. No, he opened by saying, I think this is crap, and you should think this is crap too, but we're going to have a hearing to make people think that we're actually objective about this. So what Mr. Brown is suggesting here is that money isn't money unless we tell you it's money. Is it necessary for a government to back or make a promise about money for it to be money?
If only I was in the room. I would love to say things, but what gives me hope is that guys like you, Nate, and that we have a voice. Guys like you, guys like I, that we have a voice to put out there and get our information out there to help people right now, because people like this are blatantly lying. I want to see people take that money out of the bank and put it into safe haven assets.
What you're really saying here, and I just want to clarify here, is that you want people to take the promise of the government out of the equation as to how to store their value. Don't trust the government's promise that it's going to have value. Put it into something that basically game theory and the fact that there is a finite amount of something, put it there, because the value proposition of Bitcoin, which isn't promised anything by any government, which is a good thing. I mean, you take a look at how, who trusts the government anymore. Why would you trust the government with your store of value? Take that store of value away from the government's promise and take that value and put it into something that that you don't have to worry about storage, because you can put it on a USB drive or on a small hardware wallet that'll fit on your keychain. Or for that matter, you talked about this earlier, you can just keep the word phrase in your head and travel anywhere you want to with all of your assets on your person, or actually better spoken, in your person. And you have your value, and no government can hyperinflate that value away from you, as we've seen in Venezuela. We've heard about the business owners that have stored their value in their currency, thinking that they were going to be able to have either a retirement or be able to pass along some value to their family, and the government stole that from them by hyperinflating the currency, and now that currency isn't worth anything that they saved their whole lives for.
Bitcoin, like when I say the founding fathers were Bitcoiners, is, I mean, if you brought them here, they'd be like, first off, they'd go, how did you let this happen? The reason our money was made out of silver and gold coinage, why we had, nickels and dimes and 50-cent pieces and quarters that were all denominated out of silver, and then the gold was denominated out of, a dollar, 2.5, 5, 10, 20 out of gold, all in different divisible weights. They did this for a reason, because our money was supposed to be money everywhere. If we didn't trust, the whole reason for the Constitution, the whole reason for the Declaration of Independence was to protect the citizens against a possible tyrannical government. They were afraid of the tyrannical government that the crown had put them under, and they wanted to make sure that we never had a tyrannical government ever again.
But to answer the question for people that are new to Bitcoin, we talk, like I said, why Bitcoin? And we've really answered a whole lot of why Bitcoin and why it's better than fiat, why it's better than gold, why it's better than any other physical item that might be considered a money. Let me ask you this. Do you have, for listeners that are new to the space, or that want to learn more about Bitcoin from other sources, do you have, say, 3 books that you would recommend to somebody that wants to learn more about Bitcoin and the financial system and what they can do, how they can learn more?
I think that this one, Bitcoin Standard, was the best one that I've read so far. I'm pretty, if I'm honest, if I'm only in Bitcoin over the last, it's been a year and a half, almost 2 years now. So it hasn't been that long that I've been in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit over a year, like a year and a quarter, because I got into Bitcoin just before doing the YouTube. And that was a little bit over a year ago when I started my YouTube channel. So I'm relatively new into Bitcoin, where you have a lot more experience. So I can't say like every single book, but what I can say is when I read the Bitcoin Maximalist, which is one of the few that I have read, what I loved about that book is it goes over the history of money in the beginning of it. And that's something that not everybody knows about, what money used to be. I mean, do people know salt used to be money? Cattle used to be money? Do they know seashells used to be money? Do they know certain types of rings made out of a certain stone was money? Do they know this? Because when you read that book, you realize, oh, this is how silver and gold came to be. But realistically, we don't have a system like Bitcoin until Bitcoin. And now that Bitcoin exists, I think to myself, I hope that more people learn about self-custody. And me and my buddy Mike on Twitter had been talking about this, and he's one of the few people that convinced me that it makes sense for some people to have their money in a Bitcoin ETF if they do come out with a Bitcoin ETF, or in Grayscale or in Coinbase, whatever it is. But he says a very, very small part of the people that don't understand cold storage, that's going to be their on-ramp into Bitcoin. But I would still argue that I hope that 95% of people in Bitcoin learn cold storage and watch videos that Nate has done, because Nate has done some great videos on the Trezor and all the different cold storages out there. And you make them, those 2-minute videos are great videos. I hope you do more of those videos and maybe more detailed stuff in the future. Maybe we can do some type of collaboration or something about that. But I would love more people to know about cold storage and how significant it is, because once you get that, I just don't want to, I can't overstate that, how important it is for people to take custody of their Bitcoin in any way that you can, whatever on-ramp is available to you, whether it's Gemini, Coinbase, Cash App, whatever it might be. Because in the future, if enough people take their Bitcoin out of the system and have control of their Bitcoin, you now have leverage.
Rob Soltan, I want to thank you so much for being on this program and just sharing from your heart what you feel and your experiences with metals and with fiat, and your ideas about what's happening and why Bitcoin is so important for people to get a hold of. And I echo what you said before as far as cold storage is concerned. When you recognize that you don't need permission to store it, you don't need permission to transfer it. If you got more than $10,000, you don't need anybody to tell you it's okay to send that money anywhere in the world. Then you know that you have power over the value that you created when you earned it, so that when you go to spend it, it will have at least the same amount of value. Rob, I know that your YouTube channel is... I know that your YouTube channel is Rob Soltan, and he talks about everything from Bitcoin to gold to fiat to patriotism and the Constitution, because I know that you got a huge heart for the history of the United States and what was intended to be. For those who want to follow you on Twitter Spaces, just shout out what your Twitter handle is real quick.
I'm mad about this. Like, I will pay some, like, Twitter. Like, people know I have this thing in my head where it's like nails on a chalkboard. If it's like these little things, everything has to be clean near me. Everything has to be like the exact same. So I have at Rob Soltan on Instagram, and I have at Rob Soltan on YouTube. And then I have but with Twitter, I have RJ Soltan. So I have my middle initials, Joseph, so J, RJ Soltan. And I'm like, is Rob Soltan available on there? Please. It's not like I'm taking Rolex or something. Like, it's like nobody else is Rob Soltan. Can I have this thing? And it's like account suspended. I'm like, who suspended this account? Can I have the account, please, guys? Like, please, God, let me have the account. But it's RJ Soltan on Twitter, and then Rob Soltan on Instagram.
There you go. So if you want to follow Rob, or maybe even have a conversation with him about some of the topics that we've discussed here today, by all means, hop onto Twitter Spaces. I'm going to have a link in the description of the YouTube video, and also in the description for the podcast for his website, for mineralx.com. So you can check that out if you're interested in precious metals. And Rob, it's been a pleasure having you on and just having this discussion. I hope that you will come back and do it again.
It's an honor, and congrats on starting the podcast. I think everybody that watches this, if you don't subscribe to this channel, you're really missing out. Nate is a real patriot. I've talked to Nate for hours and hours and hours prior to doing this interview, much more so than I've talked to anybody in the past month. So we've talked a long time on the phone and stuff, and I'm like, oh my. Somebody else in the world, I thinks similar. It's like, oh, it's such a. I feel lucky to have met you, Nate, and everybody that's watching this for the first time. This is the first video on this podcast. If you do not follow this channel, you're really going to be missing out, because Nate is a real stand-up individual, and he has a lot of good information for you. So I highly recommend subscribing to this channel here. Thanks again for having me, Nate. I really look forward to doing these again, and it's really an honor to be the first one of these that you do, and I wish you nothing but success, and I know you'll be successful with this channel.
I appreciate that, Rob. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, everybody out there that's listening to the podcast, and those of you who are on YouTube. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, or leave me a review on the podcast feed of your choice. I'd really appreciate that. That will help me out a lot, so that we can bring you more information, more interviews like this one. So until next week, we'll see you then. Bye.
The preceding was an excerpt from an episode of The Nate Martin Show, and any materials herein should not be construed as financial or legal advice.